Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted to be with my good friend, co-founder and general all-round genius, Dr. Tom Gruber. He's chief scientist, he's an AI impact advisor, he's a product designer, he co-designed Siri, the iPhone personal assistant, an Apple design executive, he's a AI researcher, and he's also an adopted Hawaiian, and hence the background on his screen. So welcome, Tom. We're talking about AI today, and maybe more importantly, AI in the future.
This is a great time. I have been doing business and AI forever, just like Dan here. And it's a great time to be alive and be kicking in technology because the AI thing is happening in front of us. But what's also fun is to let's get our act together and knowing a little bit about AI and what it means for business for real, instead of just get past the hype and everything. So one of the fun things about AI today is actually everyone can use it. So its power really is in its ubiquity and its universality. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So first of all, when we talk about technology and humanity or technology and business, it's not a thing that stands on its own, technology over here and business over here. We have to talk about that relationship. And the relationship with AI is a new one. It's a little more nuanced than just it's a tool thing. And we'll dig into that. But it's a partnership more than a tool relationship. That's why I made this image that shows it not quite the hand sparking Adam and Moses and God in the Sistine Chapel picture people always show of the robot hand and the human hand. It's more of a partnership. So let's go with what the heck is anyway. So AI is a technology. By the way, almost every single image, in fact, I think every image I'm going to show you today was made by AI and me. In other words, I told it some things I wanted to try to visualize and it helped me visualize. This is a generic notion of what is a chip-based supercomputer software thing. How might you visualize that? And we came up with this crazy visualization, which is there's no reality to this at all. There's nothing in the world that looks like this, but it looks like technology, right? So this is a new thing. What is this technology? How is it different than other technology? Let's get started with it. There's no question that you can use AI today as an amazing tool. Now, this image, we're trying to make the point is that today, if you're a creative person and you want to make images that visualize an idea like we're showing today, you can use AI like a superpower. So this is just, I wanted to show a picture of a human at the desk, and there's an infinity of images that human can generate to serve his or her needs. And that is truly amazing. It has never been true in history before, something this general purpose. And of course, it's really strong in language and in images right now. But the thing that's very different is that not only is it a tool, but it also sits on our side of the screen. That is, it can use our tools, right? And it can understand what we create. You can give it images and text and say, what do you think? And you can say, here's a tool like a Microsoft Excel or something, help me use it, do some stuff for me, or even write a program. And in fact, more generally, because of that, it actually can do our work, some of our work. And that's where the relationship thing is new. So let's drill a little bit down. Let's just talk about what it's like to use generative AI today. Basically, you think of it as what you can get from ChatGPT or any of the other ones that are similar. What is it these things can let everyone use today? Let's start with just the things you can actually do as a knowledge worker. If you're watching this webinar, you already are a knowledge worker, you already work with information all day long. You can already use this stuff to your advantage. So I'll give you a handful of use cases, but the most important one, and the easiest low-hanging fruit here is summarization. So if you give it a thing you're trying to read or comprehend or consume or scan or make sense of, you just give it the content. You might say, give it a URL or upload a paper or anything and say, summarize this thing. And you're probably in pretty good shape there. It's a pretty safe and helpful use case. I'll give you an example. There was a 300-page paper, an AI paper that I was trying to understand, and I just don't have time. It would take me probably a couple of days to really consume that paper, understand it completely. And so I gave it to GPT-4 and said, hey, read this paper, summarize it. It created a summary of a few sentences, It was really a good summary. After looking back at all I know now, is wow, it really got the high important points really well. And then what I would do is have a conversation about the summary. Say, okay, that first sentence you said, let's drill in there. What do you mean by that? And you can literally have a conversation about any content at all. And you're in good shape here. It's a good use of large language models and generative AI. Another use case is analysis. You can say, I like to think of these AIs today as like your professional services consultant, KPMG, Price Waterhouse, McKinsey, whatever you met. Those houses hire, of course, the smartest educated kids that can get out of college. The young people don't really know anything about the real world yet, but they're educated. They can read and write, and they can analyze and generate reports, right? And then the professional service firms teach them over the first year or two on projects things about business and the real world, and eventually they become partners and so on. The AIs today are like the KPMG consultant, the new one that just got out of Harvard, but it happens to have read a million lifetimes of content. So it's a generally smart, educated person, but not a person, a thing, but it has read more content than any humans can even dream of reading. And because of that, it's a smart aleck and knows a lot, but it's also extremely good at the core function of the undergraduate that just got out of college and is working at a consulting firm, and that is analysis and report generation.
So you could argue it's massively knowledgeable, but not necessarily smart.
Not wise, yeah, not experienced.
Yeah, knowledgeable, but not wise.
Super good at processing words, right? Taking a thing, hey, new college grad, I'm going to give you this pile of paper. I want you to read it and get back to me with a report on it so I can give the report to my client and talk about business. That's the kind of thing these LLMs are really good at. And again, you're in safe territory as long as you characterize it as an intern or as a young new employee that doesn't really know anything. It just knows how to work with words. A slightly better use case, not slightly, slightly more interesting use case is brainstorming. You can actually tell it, okay, you can actually have 3 or 4 of them running at once and say, okay, GPT-1, I want you to take the position of an extreme conservative cynic, doesn't believe that you can do anything with technology or whatever the subject is. Let's say you're trying to design something or make a business decision. You can say, you take this perspective and you take this kind of crazy, everything goes perspective on what the sky's the limit. You over here take the position of an older person who's seen a lot. You take the position of the lawyer who's seen a lot. You can literally give them roles and say, let's brainstorm. What would that perspective say about the decision? And then you can say to it, generate all the possible options you can think of that we have in front of us when we're making this kind of decision or this kind of design choice. And it's really good at those too, as long as you realize that all of these roles you're giving them are just fictitious roles. It's really fiction. It works in fiction. It doesn't work in the realm of fact. So it's now generating from its head what it might imagine a person like a lawyer or a doctor or a conservative business person, whatever, are what they would say about it, but they aren't lawyers and doctors. Just keep it clear. And in fact, the thing that's the use case, that the generalization of the use case that they actually work well on is anything that feels like autocomplete. If you wanted to write bad poetry, you give it the first line of the bad poetry, or you give it the title of the poem, and it'll write you 100 lines of bad poetry, and it'll just keep writing because it's completing. Or if you give it, give me a summary of XYZ, it'll just write the summary. So those are pretty good.
I wrote a song with ChatGPT.
All right.
It was. I wouldn't recommend anybody performs it, but it was quite interesting.
Yeah. No, it's fun. I actually have an AI and music company right now, and this is a weird time because if you think about it, most lyrics to most rock songs are really terrible anyway. So if you wanted to write your lyrics, they can do as good as humans' job. But anyway, but the final thing is a use case that I want to like. If you take out nothing else from today's conversation, do not use these things as search engines. They are not search engines. They are terrible. And I'll give you an example of why. So let's I'm talking to ChatGPT. In fact, preparing for these slides, I said, I'm going to give it I'm going to do an underhanded swing, a softball pitch, so the thing can hit it out of the park. I'm going to say, look, hey, GPT-4, let's talk about GPT-4. And so I was asking it to give me a list of things that distinguish GPT-4 from GPTs. And it says, oh, GPT-4 has capacities way before earlier models. I say, well, okay, fine. It's fine to tell me that they are ones, but tell me exactly what capabilities, and I just quoted it, far beyond earlier models. And particularly, I added this thing on the end. It says, and how do we know that? So it did a good job. And this is, by the way, a good best practice. You prompt it with a bit of, and prove your point. Don't just go on. So here's what it says. It says, yep, it does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, intern, Harvard graduate, and just bullet point the answers. It's great. And it all looked great. I was reading through, oh, this is wonderful. Now I can, if someone asks, what are the top 5 things it's different about? And then I got to 6, and I said, oh, creative ability, that's interesting. It says it can generate poetry and so on, and it's capable of more creative tasks like composing music. And I went, that's interesting, because I know that space, and I know that GPT-4 doesn't compose music at all. I said, okay, this is going to be fun. Let me just ask it the same kind of thing. Tell me what supports the claim you just made in item 6. I just copied and pasted it back to itself. I'm trying to trick it. I'm saying, you said this. Now tell me why you said this. And it goes, actually, there's no evidence at all to suggest this is true. Never mind. I contradict myself. At least it was honest about contradicting itself. So what the heck is going on here? What's going on here is something called hallucination. Although the technically better word is confabulation. These things do not know what they're talking about. They make things up. They make things up in the literal many senses of that phrase. They are generative. That's what a generative means. They make stuff up. And it's inherent in the way they work. And it's not a criticism of them, it's just a characterization of it. But one way of thinking about this is that as smart as they are, they're a savant. That is, that they're extremely smart at one dimension of intelligence and idiotic in all the others. And I call it a language savant, because their superpower actually is language. Now, language is a big
point here, Tom. There's a really interesting point, because in the human world, when you, particularly early in your career, when you meet people who are really articulate and very fluent, they sound massively intelligent. And I know you and I have had this conversation over the years, but it's this, the danger is in the real human situation, you meet people who are very articulate and you assume that behind that very sharp narrative articulation is a sharp brain, and sometimes there isn't. And that can often lead to misunderstandings and problems and wishing you hadn't listened.
Absolutely.
And it's a kind of similar situation, right?
Yeah. No, I had a friend that just went through this. He hired a very top lawyer based on how smart the lawyer sounded. And in terms of the guy was almost incompetent in law, but he was very good. Here's the thing, these language savants, all right? Now, of all things to be smart at, language is a pretty good one, because they could be really smart at memorization or math. They're terrible at math, things like that, but they're not. They're really good at language. But because of that, they're misleading, Dan just says. What is that? Let's drill down. There's specifically things that you'd be surprised to understand. But I'm telling you, as an AI architect expert on this, they have no way to know what they're talking about. They have no strategy for thinking. Now, I'm not saying that as like criticism. I'm saying architecturally, engineering-wise, there's no moving parts in there to learn or to understand or to think about thinking. So the reason I say that is because the old style, what they call good old-fashioned AI, which we're old enough to have done a lot of, it did have strategies for thinking. And because of that, you could ask it, why did you give me that answer? And it could tell you why I gave you that answer. These really can't do that. The second thing is, despite the fact that they appear to know things, they don't actually have a database. They don't look anything up. They don't, in fact, go back to the internet and search the internet and give you some answers. They were trained by reading all this stuff on the internet. And then they have an ancestral memory packed into the brain. If you say, hey, can GPT-4 do music? It goes, well, I think so. My ancestral memory, my archetypical memory tells me it can, but it actually didn't look it up, because if it looked it up, it'd find a bunch of humans saying it can't. Right? And finally, even if you say, look, I'm taking one of your claims and asking you to justify the claim, which is that claim true or not? It doesn't really know. Even when I asked it, when it says never mind, it didn't actually know with confidence that GPT-4 doesn't do music. It's just when I ask it that way, it's more likely the sort of the BS machine is more likely to say, actually, if you ask it that way, of course I don't do music. Right? This is an important point, and it helps you understand how to characterize what they do. Now, what are the implications of that? One of them is this. This is like a talking chimp, right? If you had a talking chimp, like you might see in a TV show or something, and it's like really clever. I mean, it talks good in the game. It's read a million lifetimes of literature. It can talk to you about anything. You can pretend to be Shakespeare if you want. It's a really clever chimp. But would you give the chimp who talks a good game the controls to your airplane? Probably not, until it can prove that it actually can safely fly your airplane. There's nothing in the way the chimp talks that would convince you that it's a good pilot. But you know what? This is what we're doing today when we hook up one of these large language models to an API, right? The API, the application programmer interface, this is the thing in the software that allows one program to control something elsewhere in the world. It could be another programmer, it could be, so for instance, when I do a transaction online to sell stock, that's using an API. If I'm if I'm buying a thing on e-commerce, that's API. If I'm actually posting a message on a social media thing and pretending to be such and such a person, you can do that with an API. So basically anything you can do with a computer program today, you can do with an API. And a lot of people, a lot of businesses are hooking up the APIs, which is the way the material world has changed. Money, matter, humans. It's even the way you hire humans. Today, you can hire humans over an API called TaskRabbit in the US. Gig economy, you can actually hire humans as if they're just things that operate on an API. And this is one of the dangerous things that leaving them alone with equipment can lead to. Of course, there's a lot of conversation and worry that people could hook them up to APIs that can do weapons and so on. So anyway, just remember the metaphor. Don't let your talking chimp fly your airplane. But what can you...
Maybe by the same token, Tom, you want to be careful if your chimp is giving guidance to your most valued customers. You want to be careful. It might sound good, but do you really want your customers being guided by a chimp?
Exactly. Yeah, and even though he talks a good game, that's not true. So what's in a positive way, as an individual now, what do you need to do to be good at using AI? And the interesting thing is the first skill you need is the skill you need to be good at dealing with the internet as powered by AI today. If you do anything like a modern AI and a modern internet citizen, you're exposed to this torrent of nonsense coming over through social media mainly, right? And if you don't have critical thinking skills, you're just going to be confused and misled and go down the rabbit hole. And that critical thinking skill is even more important now when you're using a professional BS artist as your assistant. And then a few other things, actually, that's not so obvious. You have to professionalize skills that normally people don't learn right out of school or even in school, right? You have to become effectively a teacher, leader, manager, not an individual contributor. You need to become a leader of AI agents to effectively use them. And what does that mean to be a good manager, good leader? It means you have to be able to be very clear in the goals you're trying to achieve, be smart about who do you delegate it to, like choosing, okay, I want an AI that can do this thing really well, I want to delegate to that. Understand what delegation really means. What things do I keep to myself as a human and which things do I let a machine do? So if I say, for instance, I'm writing a piece of code, and I might say, well, understanding the clarity of the goals of writing the code is my problem, but writing a specific function that does something that I can describe well, that's a computer problem. And delegation is a hard skill.
And these are very collective, these are quite highly developed human skills. So you could argue that if you're thinking of getting 100,000 people in your company all exploiting AI in this way, you might be being a little bit optimistic. You've got to choose the people who have these skills or develop the skills in them.
Exactly. So everyone shouldn't just say, I can use AI to do anything. Right. You might want to actually help orchestrate how the AI is being used in business processes. If we're going to delegate things, let's get a bunch of human minds thinking about, is that a good thing to delegate? Mm-hmm. And if so, how are we going to manage? When you delegate, of course, there's half of delegation is monitoring. So you see how if you have, let's say you have this new employee and you delegate something to them, and in the early days, you don't delegate a huge mission critical task to them. And then as you watch them do their job, you think, did they do what I asked them to do, and how well did they execute? The same things happen with AI. And you can calibrate. So for instance, as a computer programmer, the whole world of software engineering is changing now, and sophisticated software engineers are learning how to know what to delegate. So it turns out that most of the teams that I work with, they're getting a good 20-30% productivity improvement. But what they're using the AI for mainly is they kind of go out to the web, find if someone's solved this problem before, read their code, take it in, and apply it to my current problem. Sort of the reuse of knowledge that's been out there in the web. Those are the kind of things that the AI is really good at. They call that, a good name for it, it's called raccoon programming. Raccoon programming. It's
but
like
it's an
when a
interesting
raccoon.
point. Interesting point, come back to critical thinking, is I know talking to CTO Andy, he says you can do this stuff, you can get the code, but you wouldn't want to run it unless you really applied critical thinking to it. You might want to use it for the ideas. Don't just take the stuff that it comes with and run it, because you're going to end up with all sorts of mess. So those 5 qualities are really important.
And the mutual learning thing is just basically, look, this happened with Google search, and that's 20 years ago, right? Google, at first it came out, it was just the best of a few search engines that you can type a couple of words in and get something back. And we were very impressed when you could type in AA and it came up with American Airlines. Wow, that's amazing. It got better and better. But then we co-evolved with Google. So now we type in long sentences to Google. And we also understand what kind of things like nice long named entities and things like that give us precise results. And so that we learned how to use Google, and at the same time, Google, the company, wasn't asleep. They're noticing, hey, people are giving these high precise queries. We can do deeper in our retrieval. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. It's already happening because, yeah, as you can see, if you haven't been under a rock in the last couple of years, it's moving faster than most technologies have ever moved in history, and it's co-evolving with us very rapidly. Just a little bit looking forward in the world, it is very going fast, but you know what? It hasn't even got up to what the Siri vision was. Siri didn't either, but the Siri vision was a personalized AI, right? That actually you can trust, that you give it all your personal data and it can help you navigate the world, get things done. And this is the other holy grail people forget. Everyone's obsessed with AGI, which is a general purpose knowledge worker capability. But really, if you want humanity's impact, you need to have AI that can know all about you as an individual and you can trust to share your data with and can give you the advice. We're not there yet, but we know enough about what a personal AI would be to know that one of the big problems we need to solve is the trust and privacy of the data. If you give it, for instance, you could probably give GPT out of OpenAI, this startup, you could give them all of your email and say, hey, now help me find things in my email or help me write email. You could do that, but you would be violating every NDA you ever signed the moment you did that, because you're violating a trust boundary. So it's a much bigger problem than people realize, and no one has really solved it yet. We'll see. I'm looking forward to Google and Apple who have trusted platforms, at least in mobile. I think we should be able to see something from them. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about AI in business, since this is a business conversation. The first thing here is a big distinction, this idea that there is 2 kinds of AI. There's automation and augmentation. Automation is, I like this photograph. This is the only, this is actually a real photo. No, this is a stock image. So it was constructed by an artist rather than AI. But I just like the picture so much because it looks really scary. You don't want to be on the conveyor belt, right? This is a place which is too dangerous for humans. It's got a bunch of crazy looking powerful machines. They're faster and meaner and stronger than humans. And we can trust them that they're going to operate safely in that particular environment. That's what automation's for.
And it's repetitive tasks. Automation is about repetitive tasks, which is great. And obviously augmentation is the new world.
Yeah. Now, augmentation, you see this human surrounded by a ton of things the AI has done for it. And this is more like what knowledge workers are going to have, augmentation of our existing jobs. Now, there's more subtlety to this. Let's take a look at AI. If AI is automation of knowledge work, it immediately leads to the conclusion that AI can compete with and displace our jobs, right? And so there are situations where that's going to happen, but That's not actually the purpose of AI, at least in some businesses. Maybe that's what we're trying to do, is get the expensive humans out of there. But honestly, it's not the most noble use of technology, but it will happen. And I'll characterize situations where I think it makes sense. And then I think the most underappreciated and probably the biggest impact in the next 10 years of AI is going to be AI's collaborator. So augmentation is like the individual augmentation of for instance, I have glasses on, they're augmenting me, I can see better with them on, and they do a better job of seeing and focusing than my lenses do by themselves, but I'm not going to replace my eyes with the glasses. It doesn't make any sense. So that's the nature of AI's augmentation. AI as collaborator is the same idea, but applied to group work. So or work in an environment. So the first picture is a student. It's only one student in the room, but effectively the AI is a collaborator, like a tutor of the student. And the draftsman there, or the people in a meeting, again, because it can understand the content that we're working with now and never could before, and we can talk to it in language, we can now invite it as a collaborator. So that's those concepts, augmentation versus automation and collaboration versus competition, I boil up into this phrase, humanistic AI. And that's AI that's really designed and oriented towards human needs by taking the road to the right, which is augmentation and collaboration, rather than the road to the left, which is automation and competition. So now, given that framework, it's not very complicated. You probably heard these ideas before. Let's dig in on this whole wave of disruption idea. Waves are a really fun metaphor. Here I am in Maui. We have great surfing waves. So someone sees there's a giant storm coming up. There's a double overhead swell coming, which means that the waves are like 2 or 3 times as tall as a human. They're big friggin' waves. Okay, that for some people is a really exciting prospect. Let's get our board, let's go to the North Shore, and let's go jump in the water. For other people, it's terrifying because you can drown and get bashed against the reef with the same wave, right? And I think technology is a lot like that. And in particular, because this is such a general purpose or omni-purpose technology, we're talking about a pretty big wave, a wave which can redefine the relationship between capital and labor. The very notion that we get paid to do something as a knowledge worker is going to be redefined when a lot of what we do can be done much cheaper by a machine. But if you take this framework of augmentation versus automation and so on, and apply it to the problem of disruption, what I think is going to happen is we're going to have a wave of transformation rather than a wave of disruption. So let's dig a little bit into that. So there are cases where automation is going to happen. And I think the 3 properties that define the whole category of jobs that are going to be automated away, and I'm just sorry to say there's nothing you can do about it because it's the way as long as we have a free market economy and relatively free flow of capital and everything, you're going to have jobs displaced by automation, but not most jobs, just jobs where one, the job itself is not already being well done, right? It's call centers. We've all had experience. Something goes wrong, you need a product and service for your product or help with the website or whatever it is. It's always a failure mode. It's always frustrating. And then after you get to a human, there's a human there that doesn't really know what they need to know. And it's already not so well served. And there's going to be other jobs, say having a guy sit in a bar and play guitar. There's plenty of humans that do that, and it's pretty well served already. You don't need an artificial robot playing a guitar in a bar. There's plenty, that's not a problem to automate because the problem isn't underserved. The second thing is business isn't going to bother automating jobs unless human labor is already a bottleneck. So if there's one human in the corporation that does a job, really just keep paying the human. No one's gonna make a startup to automate that one person's job. But here,
I've got a question for you, Tom, because we discussed it earlier. There's a great quote which is almost philosophical in this area, and this person wrote, which is thought-provoking. I want AI to do my laundry and my dishes so I can do art and writing. I don't want AI to do my art and writing so I can do my laundry and dishes. Yeah. So what's your thoughts about it? Because that's an interesting bit of philosophy and also reflects a little bit on what we're seeing with AI and technology today. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a really good area. I mean, it is very it's unfortunate that the first wave of automation appears to be going at some fun jobs like making images and making and writing. Although I think what's really happening is those people who are creative with writing or image generation or soon music are going to continue to be creative in those areas and using AI as an augmentation. And for instance,
if you come back to your 5 qualities, that by definition that's true. You've got to be able
look at this image. I worked a couple hours to get this image right. All right. I wanted an image that showed a call center as an infinitely large space with ethnically ambiguous and gender ambiguous humans in it, that are all doing a job that's all the same. That it needs to have some of a dystopian kind of look feel to it, right? This is the kind of stuff that movie makers do, right? This is sophisticated visual metaphor. And it took me a couple hours working with an AI. I didn't put a pen to paper on this though. I didn't draw a single pixel. And you see all the way through this talk, there's all these wooden figures that show up. That's my metaphor for the AI chatbot today. That took me a couple of days to get that, but I couldn't do that even with, I hired a designer and paid him a few $1,000s to work with me on this. And the designer and me worked with the AI. I couldn't have afforded, even with that designer, to have enough iteration on these ideas to do the quality that we ended up getting. And that's the key use, is take where a thing could be done better with a machine and a human together. And so we're going to see that. So it's, unfortunately, there are people who like to do, say, write or paint or make music, and they found a way of making a living at it today, say writing jingles for commercials or making images for stock images or for those jobs aren't that valuable anymore because everyone can do this stuff with AI. So that's the difference. So now the irony here is that doing the laundry and the dishes is actually out of reach of AI because it requires robotics. And despite everyone keeps talking about robotics is completely unsolved problem. Yeah, it's funny thing. We'll get that. The large language models are making progress in this case. Anyway, the third property here is that the service itself is fungible. That is, it doesn't matter. You can have you have 10,000 people in a call center, and you can train a new person to do the job quickly, and they can leave. By the way, it's one of the highest turnover rates of any industry. So something like 60% of the people quit within a year. And so it has to be fungible. That's why it's going to get automated. Now let's go to something that isn't going to be automated entirely, something that's going to be augmented. So you see again my graphic designer here with all the images. That aspect of that person's job, that is, I have a visual idea, make me an image. Okay, that inner loop, that task is going to be automated, is being automated. And in fact, if you think about the business of, say, marketing services, the whole life cycle of an advertisement, which has content, visual, written content, the life cycle of that creative service is going to be highly automated by AI.
Point, Tom, because I think, like all these things go in cycles, I'm not convinced that's going to carry on at the rate it has been, because already, I don't know whether you notice, I'm already getting a little bit bored of generated images. Your images, of course, are wonderful because you generated them in Hawaii. But in general, you see a lot of generated images. And sometimes I want to see a photograph. I want to see a really good photograph, not a generated image. And I can see there's a bit of kickback coming back on that. I don't know if you're seeing that. But
I think that, well, the reason you're seeing the first wave, people haven't really mastered how to use it. I worked with the designer I'm working with here has a whole company in how to combine AI with art, with generation. He's top of the game in how to use these tools. And also I have a sense as a photographer what I want to get. But what you're seeing is just poor quality. But you can get poor quality imagery by humans too. The interesting thing here is that I'm involved in a business that is in this space, and it's pretty clear that if you look at the cost, the labor and the business processes involved in advertisement, in figuring out what to advertise, what messaging to use, how to place the ads, see if they work, that whole life cycle works better when you can generate like 100 examples instead of one and test 100 in parallel. So there's going to be ads coming out in parallel, especially on the web, where they'll make 100 variations and they'll test them all. Within a few days, they'll get the data back and okay, these are the ones that work.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see that whole thing is going to be automated. It's already being automated. Now, on the other hand, on the right-hand side here, you've in real marketing services. By the way, this is a completely fake photograph made by AI. If you really drill in, see, you can see the faces are macabre and stuff if you drill in deep. This is, but normally look, nobody stares at the face, you don't even care. The point of this is just a bunch of humans in a room, right, having a conversation. Now, if you're in the marketing services business, a lot of what you do is talk to clients, make sense of make a bet, like a Mad Men bet. Is this something that the market wants? These are basically human judgments about human needs, which are really not fungible, automatable tasks today, because they're really just about dealing with other humans. The marketing services business is going to be this augmentation disruption for a while. Now, I don't want to live in a world where the AI is smarter than everyone else at learning how to essentially persuade us, which is really the world that the social media people were sending us down. If with the new generative AI, you can get even better at persuasion, you're going to have a dystopian world there, because it'll be superhumanly good at hoodwinking you. So now, let's talk about businesses that aren't just generic, like vertical businesses. A lot of you are in different, financial services, or you might have a financial service function within a larger company. And you talked about, Dan, you're saying today you're not so impressed with the generative AI so far. We're only at the very beginning. And this, by the way, this image is silly, but it's basically, I told it, give me a picture of a bunch of venture capitalists picking the low-hanging fruit. The generic venture capitalist guy with a blazer and the hair. So this low-hanging fruit has been picked, especially in the investment side. You see this wave of investment where it's just this complete fad of throwing infinite amounts of money at these AI companies. It doesn't mean they're valuable. It just means it's the investment fad. And also partly we're seeing like the same thing that happened in .com 20 years ago, which is these demos. Look, I can sell pet food, and look how hard it is to put pet food in warehouses. Look at this, I'm going to do it on the web, pets.com or whatever. And these demos are really easy to make with AI. So you can fake them out big time. But we're running out of these stupid demos that just don't really show the technology. They just show a use case. And the hard things are the solutions require application integration, workflow, process engineering, right? Actually understanding the business. And what that means is that Sam Altman over there in Palo Alto doesn't know squat about your business, and his technology doesn't either. So someone has to bridge that gap. And that's going to be the vertical businesses. Yeah.
This is a great point, Tom. We talked about this earlier as well, because I think this is a really key thing for businesses right now. Is obviously there's massive opportunity presented by AI, and particularly generative AI, but we're still struggling, just as we do in the consumer world, but in businesses, of sometimes taking solutions looking for a problem. And the truth of the matter is that, I can't remember who said it, but the first rule of any technology used in a business is that you apply technology to an efficient end-to-end operation, a process, a set of outcomes, and you'll magnify that efficiency. But if you apply any technology to a poorly defined process, you'll magnify the inefficiency. You won't just get zero, you'll get net negative. And I think that's a really big issue right now.
That's right. Yeah. Now you could easily, so let's take an example that's really easy to understand. We have, even before generative AI, if you have labeled data, supervised learning, which is actually most of AI, right, in business is supervised learning. That is, there's a data set that has labeled correct answers in it, and you're training the AI to predict or classify the data to match, to predict or classify data into those correct answers. You're diagnosing disease or predicting a customer behavior or something. Now, in those cases, we saw what happened when you optimize the goal. If you tell it the goal is make sure and get these answers right. If the goal is called the objective function, and when we gave the objective function to social media's AI, the objective function was keep people addicted, keep them scrolling, keep them viewing. And it worked better than anyone could have imagined. It addicted 2 billion people within 5 years. And so we're seeing that's a misplaced value alignment. That's misplaced goals. It's only, of course, addiction, which they will call engagement, is a business value. But if it's the only business value, you get these runaway crazy things happening. Whereas in business today, we have to manage multiple stakeholders, multiple kinds of optimization criteria, not just profit maximization. And that's part of the leadership part of this. When you do an AI project, make sure we understand the goals. And you can literally put those goals in the program, right? In the way the data and the models are being created, you can tell it, optimize for multiple goals, okay? So I'm going to give you an example, by the way, of it done. This is a vertical application of AI in legal, the domain, particularly contracts. But this company I've been with for 5 or 6 years now, they had the best natural language understanding of documents of that scene out there at the time. It was very impressive. And it's AI, but it wasn't large language models 4 years ago. It was AI of state of the art. And you could basically give it any document, and it could do a better job than any Google or anything at understanding the content of the document. It could read every sentence and tell you what the sentence means. And then you could do deep semantic query on it. But as a business, that wasn't a use case for business per se, just knowing what the words in the document are. Despite how useful you'd think that would be, it's hard. It was a B2B company. We had to find the business. So we found that the most valuable documents in an enterprise per word and per human effort are contracts. There's enormous amounts of value locked up in a contract, lots of risk in there, and it costs a $500 an hour lawyer to read them and write them. And so, yeah, they're really expensive. And so we aimed the AI technology contracts. And then GPT-4 came along, and everyone thought, well, just throw GPT-4 because it's a master, it's a language savant, it can do language, and it can pass the bar exam, so it should be able to read and write contracts. It turns out it basically is about as good as flipping the coin and understanding the clauses in a legal contract if you just give it the generic GPT-4. And that's because it really isn't fine. Legal language is complicated and hard, and in particular, precision matters. When you're looking at, is there an indemnification clause or not? Or is that lease going to expire this year or not? You don't want to be statistical about it. You want to know for sure, yes or no. And that means you have to have a high precision. So this company is called Cognizer.ai. They just worked hard and mastered the AI technology of the day and continue to do so. And now they're getting close to 100% precision and recall, which is the holy grail of natural language understanding. In other words, for every single clause, it's actually outperforming human lawyers at identifying whether there are clauses in the contract or not. And it's doing the work that human lawyers used to do now to actually label data for other AI to build models on. So it's really nailed the domain. It took a while, it was a long march, but we learned a lot from this, is that initially it was just do automate a process so that corporations can deal with their massive amount of contracts. But then we realized that there was a human bottleneck even in using AI, and that was lawyers were required to label the data. So then we used the AI to generate labeled data to train the AI to classify legal contracts and pull the clauses out. Amazing. So that's a good example.
You make a great point there. You make a great point there, Tom. And there are, again, we talk about this, in a lot of these business scenarios, there's a convergence of AI with some form of validation that's absolutely precise, binary, yes, no. Because in a lot of it, even as a consumer, but in a lot of areas of business, you don't want, I'm 80% sure this is right, because you can't tell which 80 out of 100 are right. So you need some kind of validation, some precision. So I think this balance of the technologies is probably something we're going to see more of.
Absolutely. Yeah, like in a contract, there was some of the customers of this company that had 1 million contracts. And then something in the world changed. It turns out that there's an index for inflation called LIBOR, or for interest rates. And it went out of business. It stopped to exist, and it doesn't exist anymore. But decades of contracts were written using LIBOR as the index, right? So you can do a query and say, is the word LIBOR mentioned in the contract? But then you could also do like an AI that understands, is there risk in this contract due to interest rates being pegged to LIBOR? What is the termination clause? All these kinds of things. And that is the binary decision. That's the business decision. Do I need to renegotiate this contract with my client, with my counterparty or not? And so anyway, it's a really interesting thing. Let's step back a little bit now. Let's talk about this sort of disruption thing in large. First of all, by industry. Like I said before, I think I've identified these things that mean that it's likely to be automated. It's the service is not well served, the human labor is bottleneck, and it's fungible. And we mentioned call centers, but also things like outsourced office support. There's a lot of temp office support that's done today, like hey, bring over the temp to do the X, Y. This is exactly where the sort of Microsoft Copilot business is going to make it not worth trying to hire a human to do things. Like, I need an Excel model that does X, Y, Z, just ask the thing for that. I think a bigger and more profound space is cybersecurity and fraud detection, because this stuff can't be done by humans. It's moving too fast. There's too much data to go through, and it's essentially becoming a war, an adversarial game between counterparties to the bad guys and good guys doing cyber warfare against each other. And so this whole industry will have to be automated by AI, because otherwise you'll just lose. Now, in the augmentation side, and in fact, Dan, you want to say anything, because you have a lot of work in the fraud detection area, right?
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I think automation of those things, as you say, those things that we can do repetitively and at speed, which doesn't need a lot of human oversight, because we know enough about the rules that it doesn't need human oversight. On your augmentation discussion, these are the places which the human oversight isn't going away anytime soon, because you got to make judgments. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
So we're going to see augmentation. Now, this augmentation is still a disruption, right? But we're going to see places where the market is partly served, like legal. We're not automating lawyers anytime soon. I wish we could, but they do a lot of complicated things, and they're very expensive, yes. But some of the things they do, they shouldn't be so expensive. E-discovery, contract analysis, these are things that paralegals do and stuff. We should be able to automate some of that. So it's an augmentation play. And also these industries, the thing that keeps them in augmentation land and not going in automation is also the fact that the service itself is inherently a human interface problem. Talking to clients, understanding markets, dealing with contractual negotiation. These are all human-to-human things, which are hard to automate. Now, some of the poster child industries here, software development for sure. So labor's expensive, the market's not well served, but partially served. You can hire programmers, they're just expensive and scarce. And the service isn't great. If you pay enough, you can get great service. And it's an enormous amount of back and forth about what do you want the programmer to build, requirements analysis. So those things are, but on the other hand, if you say, give me a function that does X, Y, Z, and you can characterize the function, it's going to be highly automated. Now, let me zip ahead a little bit to a kind of a conclusion, which is this: if you keep going down this path of the data can be used by AI to do amazing things, and AIs can be superhumanly good at persuasion and so on, you have and it's especially if you start using personal AI, you have this problem that in order to get the full value of AI, you're going to have to really give it a lot of data, access to a lot of data. And the problem with that is very much a two-edged sword. If you give a government AI to monitor all the data of the citizenry, you end up with totalitarian government. And we're already seeing that in China. It's locked down now. No one will ever have a chance at privacy or freedom ever, because the AI will secure the advantage of the current party in controlling life there. And that's not just large countries, that's happening in small countries. So that's one direction the future might end up, and we need to be careful to protect our own democracy against that. But I think there's another way of thinking about when we're making choices, even within industry. You could have a sort of, the data belongs to the corporation and not to the individual and so on. We still have the sort of surveillance capital option that some companies are taking. I think there's another choice. Instead of Big Brother, I think we can go to something that's called, what I call Big Mother. And in Big Mother, the AI's role is, instead of to hoodwink you and BS you and to persuade you, the AI's job is to nurture you. And so now we have whole classes of applications that can help people improve their own behavior for health, wellness, for educating themselves, to protect themselves against cyber warfare. there's a lot of things that the AI can do. And in fact, I think the bigger game is not only does we need to be critical thinkers right now, but the AIs could help teach the population how to be better critical thinkers, better managers. And finally, I really do think that the AI of the future we want to build is going to be a protective AI that allows us to live in this technologically scary, crazy world, but gives us the individual benefit of AI without having to give up our individual freedom. So I call that Big Mother. All right, this is this AGI idea. Just a couple of points on this. People talk about artificial general intelligence, and it's a scary thing because it means an AGI that can do pretty much anything better than humans. And do we want to fear that or not? And I say, just remember that the good news here is that once we create AGI, it's just software that lives on a network. And that means that we can give access to that to the entire world population. So we actually are at the point, if we choose to use it this way, to give the greatest technological invention ever, which would be AGI, to everybody in the world for basically for free. And that's definitely the world that I want to live in.
And if you need to, you can always turn the power off. That's a really great roller coaster tour through AI, where we've come from, what we're seeing now, where we're going, both a little bit dystopian, but a little bit what we really can do with it. So it's been great to talk to you again. I think we're 12,000 miles apart, which is why it's completely different there than where it is here, and we're both at odd times of the day. But thank you. I shall see you in a time zone closer to both of us very soon. Thank you, Dr. Tom Gruber. It's been wonderful to see you. I shall see you again soon.